Hey folks, McNeil here, and it's about that time that I sat down and finally answered some of the questions and comments that have been laid out on my most recent video, Fixing RWBY Part 2. Which I want to thank everyone for commenting. Even if you are critical of me, I appreciate it, because again, I need to be kept in line sometimes. But I've actually, because there's so many comments and so many things to cover, I've actually started writing down notes. I did the last one completely offhanded, but it looks like I might actually have to start writing notes from the get-go now. Ignore the bills on the other side of my paper. Yeah, no one wants to deal with my credit card charges. So let's jump right back into it, shall we? I mean, first and foremost, you have Woojin Su asking, how would this really change RWBY? How has fixing the history changed RWBY? Other than being in a world of Remnant. And this will come back later in a question that was asked much later down the line. But effectively, it helps fill in the cracks, because when you have a storyline, the way at least I go about writing a story is that you kind of get the broad arc involved, then you get the world building done. Or you get the world built, and then you have a broad arc. And then you smush the two together, and that broad arc is filled in with details from the world that you've built. So a lot of the ideas here will probably come into play very naturally, or hopefully very naturally, later down the line. And if they're not, well, they're left to the side, but there can still be environmental details that are put into the background in order to elaborate, in order to pique the interest of the curious reader. I've had the thought before, why not turn Remnant into a campaign setting for some kind of tabletop RPG, and then you could have all this information at the ready when you go forward with that, and it could earn you a lot of money and a lot of good publicity for having all this really cool shit to work off of. But that's just an idea. That's can't give you my mentality on things. Just get all this stuff down so that it's there when you need it. Because if it's not there when you need it, you're going to wind up like Rooster Teeth and fumbling around for new lore. It happens. The next most immediate question, I believe, was from Malik Reeves, who comments about bug faunus being inherently different, or how biologically bugs are different. So radically different from humans, and I would agree with that. There is some radical differences, but bug and arachnid faunus still exist, but they're incredibly rare. Because they are so genetically divergent from the common ancestor, from common humanity, they are much harder to breed with. They are much harder to actually produce children and heirs. They don't have the reproductive capabilities of insectoids, and so they actually are a much smaller population. I would say less than 1%. Hell, less than gingers are on the planet. Huh? Less than even that. So that's they exist, but they're an incredibly rare type of faunus. Like finding a needle in a haystack. And kind of further down in the comments, there was talking about whether or not I should just go with a pure genetic angle on this. I should go with an evolutionary angle. Whether or not it should be creationist. Sort of like a Lord of the Rings. Boom, they came into existence type deal. No, what I'm trying to represent a lot with these videos is the general zeitgeist of Remnant. With these two background videos, this is sort of the information that everyone kind of knows. This is the information that everyone generally accepts. Now, there are variants on that. There are still creationists in this society, people that believe faunus and humans were created simultaneously or at different times, and they aren't necessarily 100% compatible. There are people that there are people that have differing theories on faunus, and we'll actually touch upon those in just a moment when we go further down. Actually, this one entirely, like the faunus evolution as asked by the intranet, or the intratect. That's his name. It's most commonly accepted in the zeitgeist by that science has said that faunists have evolved from a common ancestor with humanity. There's a divergent moment between them. However, there is another part of the scientific community that argues against this, saying that there is that faunists are simply a divergence from humanity. That humanity is the common backbone, and that faunists are some kind of evolution in a different direction, or in some cases, some people think they're a superior evolution or an inferior devolution. And of course, you have the creationists. So the entire argument being that, you know, there's enough wiggle room there for everyone to sort of put their agenda into the science, which is what you see in today. You have a lot of people putting agendas into science, which is not how science should be handled, but is how science is practically handled. And it's a sad reality. And also shout out to Intertech9 for coming up with the best insulting phrase, the critter, for faunists. Because it has very direct parallels, it seems, or at least it feels like it has direct parallel to the strongest hate word that can be used against African Americans, at least as far as I'm aware. So very kudos there. I didn't think of that, and I think I should have. I mean, that's a fairly common word, but kudos. That's a really clever wordplay there. Looks like the next big question is Harbinger, who has some issues with my interpretation of the Great War, where it doesn't. He says that the Great War, as featured in Rooster Teeth, already parallels the Great Wars fought here in the real world, such as World War I and World War II. But I find that kind of head-scratching because the war erupted over land negotiations. And while land negotiations were a key facet of what I've put in here, the thing that truly sparked the war was, first of all, a singular event. A singular event that was meant as a sort of morale-boosting event. An art gallery. Very much similar to the parade, or I think it was a parade that that Duke Ferdinand was in. If it wasn't a parade, he was there on negotiating terms. He was there at the very minimal as a token of peace. So the entire idea of this art gallery was to kind of cool, rising tensions. Was to establish and affirm this alliance between this kind of trinity between Pseudodocus, which, by the way, it's Pseudodocus is spelled P-S. Let me write it down, actually. It's written P-S A-R-U-D-A-K-I-S. It's named after an old friend of mine from Germany. Okay, but the art gallery was the art show was a sort of big play up to promote peace between the three nations, especially considering there's rising tensions between them. Then it got shot to shit, and suddenly someone is out for blood. Mistral is out for blood. Everyone is looking for a scapegoat. Atlas found that in art. Pseudodocus just kind of fell as the scapegoat. Very much the same way that that Archduke Ferdinand was assassinated, and regardless of who actually was responsible for the assassination, blame ultimately fell onto the enemies of Ferdinand, onto the enemies of the kingdom that he was visiting from. I'm trying to remember, I think he was from Austria? I'm not entirely sure on that, but I know Austria was the kickstarter of the war. But that's the parallels there. And very much the same way, it's underground trade treaties and alliances that led to a ballooning of this conflict from a small conflict between two nations to a conflict between the nations of the world. So that's where I'd argue there are actually more parallels in my version to World War I and World War II, because I was specifically looking to those for inspiration, than Rooster Teeth's, where it was just sort of nebulous and vague as to how certain things spiraled out of control. Now, this is a brief interlude here for Moderately Entertained, who didn't really have a question or a comment, but he is providing some assistance in this matter. As you recall, he actually helped me formulate some of my ideas concerning the nature of the nations. He has created a text document, or I should say a spreadsheet, a Google spreadsheet that I will share in the link down below for everyone to be a part of. It's something where everyone can add their own personal religion of Remnant. And there are some general rules. Don't be a dick. Don't mess with anyone else's religions. But he has set up there the opportunity for you, the fans, to come up with ideas to permeate this world of Remnant. What kind of religions would be in this world? Because remember, we're not taking the stance that religion has been wiped out. We're ignoring that. That is a stupid-ass idea, and it is completely getting nixed. So what religions would populate this world? He's already provided a few as examples. I haven't provided any of my own. I'm not going to necessarily dive too deeply into religion, but I would be certainly interested to see what thoughts people come up with and some of the creative ideas you have. Feel free to maybe make Protestant religions, as in ones that are divergent from other religions that have already been featured. Give historical events, maybe give some context. I'm not saying that everything that'll be listed there, because obviously there's going to be too many people, too many cooks spoiling the broth to include all of them. I'm not going to include all of them, but maybe one or two I might handpick as good examples of what you should be striving for in a religious context when it comes to Remnant. So I offer that below. Moderately Entertained, thank you for your work. Great setup. I think you have a great format going there. And I'm really excited to see what people produce down there. Now, moving on. The Black Serpent Beta had the idea, and a pervasive idea, that Faunus are maybe they evolved in order to respond to the Grimm, in order to avoid the Grimm, because the more animal-like you are, the easier it is to camouflage yourself from the Grimm. And while I'm not going to say that's 100% fact, I'm going to say that that's definitely not necessarily a bad idea to take into consideration. What I'm going to currently say with it is that it is at least a common belief that this is the case. That since, Grimm don't actively search out prey to kill, the animals to kill, that the Faunus evolved in order to avoid that. That's sort of a common racist belief. It's no longer in effect. If it were ever true, it's no longer in effect. It's been, like, the Grimm have gotten smart enough to distinguish Faunus from animals and know that Faunus and humans are basically equivalent. But it's definitely a good thing to keep in mind, and in fact could actually lead to solving some solutions to another problem that's going to come down in just a few minutes. Shadow Reaper, poison and venom. Technically you're right. I should have said venom. But due to the common definition of poison, it's actually a very broad stroke definition. It actually covers things such as toxins and venoms. Toxins and venoms are poisons, but not all poisons are toxins and venoms, if you get the gist of it. So, technically you're right, technically you're wrong. So let's call it half and half there, shall we? Caleb Cheney had the idea that pre-Grimm history was ultimately lost, and it's not known how long the Grimm have actually existed. And Metal Dragon responded with me dropping the creationist story. I'm not dropping the creationist story entirely. It's still present, but it's a more muddied form. It's more how, again, actual religion behaves, where instead of, oh, yeah, we were actually created by gods and shit. No, we don't know. We don't know. There's a lot we don't know about the Grimm. There's a lot that people don't know about the Grimm. They're still learning about the Grimm. They don't know how old the Grimm are. It's very hard to gauge that. That's why that Grimm bone masks are actually valuable is that the older a Grimm is, the more bone it has, and the older the bone will show up in testing. So we can actually start gauging how old certain Grimm are and see how long the oldest Grimm could have been. And from there we can get a gauge for how old the Grimm are entirely. So science is still trying to figure out how old Grimm are. And history itself was never necessarily the greatest at recording it. We still are losing a significant portion of our history. If we're to go to assume that modern humanity evolved, what, 65 million years ago, recorded history is less than 1 million of that. Less than 500,000 of that. Less than half, then half, then half, then half, then half, then millions of that. Recorded history is only about, I want to say, 4,000... Oh, actually, what am I saying? I'm going with a 65 million estimate based on Chrono Trigger. What am I thinking? Alright, let's hazard really lowball this. Let's say that modern humanity evolved within the last 20,000 years. We are missing, let's say, about 3/4 of that. Roughly. We are missing 3/4 of that. So, as long as the Grimm have been around, we don't know. We honestly can't. Even if the Grimm weren't a thing, we don't have history that goes back far enough to determine that kind of shit. We just know that as long as history has been recorded, the Grimm have been around. So let's call it there, shall we? I might play with that more once we learn more about the Grimm in canon, in the actual canon. I mean, there's the beauty to this series that I can actually retroactively come back and comment upon the work that I've already done and reevaluate some of the things I've already established. I can always change the lore in this circumstance because it's not a firm production. It's a very fluid one. So when more information comes out, that might change, but for now, let's just call it what it is, and that's it. As long as history has been around, so have the Grimm. Now, the guy with the internet and a couple of people already talking about the nature of menagerie, and there are a couple of good comments here. Menagerie's government is very similar to Vacuo's. It mirrors Vacuo because Vacuo was the most kind of honest. It just seems natural for them to have taken cues from it. So it's a very tribalized system, but the tribes are divided up upon racial subtype. And each subtype gets a democratic vote. But that vote can automatically be vetoed. Any vote, any singular vote, I should say, can be vetoed by the chieftain, who is generally elected from the populace as through a pure democratic election. So Blake's father is the chieftain, and he's going to be chieftain a little bit longer. In fact, what I'm probably going to play with is that maybe he wasn't chieftain at all before Blake left. Which is another question, is that, you know, doesn't Blake's character benefit from not being royalty, effectively? Well, A, beforehand, her father was the leader of the White Fang. He's not really royalty, but when the White Fang diverges, Blake diverges from her father. She runs away from home, maybe around the ripe old age of 8. Alongside Adam Taurus, who is her friend and confidant. So we have Blake running away, participating in all these protests, living on the streets because she doesn't have any money. She didn't take anything with her. We have Adam influencing her at a young age, brainwashing her. And then in Volume 4, when she's finally gone through this whole character arc of coming to terms with who she is, she returns home and learns that her father has become basically the president of Menagerie. I think there's a lot of interesting dynamics to play with there. But we'll get into Blake specifically when we finally get into the actual volumes and learning about them as characters. I still have to sit down and start penning that. Again, I don't do that until I've finished this particular video. And in fact, my next video is going to be something different. I'll give some hints at the end. But as for what Adam is planning in Vale, why the White Fang would be recruiting in Vale, and why not, Menagerie or Atlas, where, oppression is more rapid and common, it's not in response to any one law. When it comes to laws, Vale and Vacuo are the most lenient on the Faunus. But that's the problem that Adam has with it. Adam is, or at least the White Fang, the radicalized White Fang, are looking to eliminate moderates, because at this point they are no longer being fueled on the desires of Faunus to be equal, but the desires on the Faunus to be powerful, which is a fine differential, but it's an important one. Because now no longer the White Fang are not fighting for equality, they're fighting for control. They are fighting for dominance. And in order to maintain that power, they need to eliminate anyone that can be seen as moderate. So wiping out Vale and destabilizing Vale would be key to their cause. So what they need to play upon are smaller injustices. You know, like the idea of casual racism. The idea that, you know, white people can't look African Americans in the eye. That the common misconceptions based upon, you know, race and ethnicity. They play upon small incidents to play up their cause. They try to make everything out to be a racial act. But I want to make equivalents here to more real-life extremist groups that develop around these ideas. I mean, you have obviously all Islamic terrorism, which is based a lot upon certain types of oppression. You have a lot of that. I mean, I'm not saying that's the only contributing factor. There's a lot of other contributing factors to Islamic terrorism. You have like the Black Panther movement, which is in direct contrast to the movements led by Martin Luther King Jr. You know, the Black Panthers were much more violent and demanding, and they got some results done because of it. So just, I want to follow a logical progression of radicalization when it comes to this. And for some people trying to manipulate these groups that initially started with pure motives, their first goal would be to maintain their power, destabilize the moderates so that you provide more extremists that you can siphon into your group, and create a bigger boogeyman which you can fight. It's not a bad style, and I think the White Fang functioning on this principle is kind of a terrifying concept. Benjamin I provided the idea of Blake secretly being a double agent. I don't really think that's necessary. I think it would too radically change a lot of what RWBY is so far, and I think Blake herself as a character has a lot of the best elements going towards her to create the most interesting character in the show, and I just think they're being horribly mishandled. I mean, you've got racial tensions, you've got trust issues, you've got maybe PTSD, you've got a lot of these elements circling in her head, you've got guilt complexes. She has enough going for her without being a double agent. If you really want a good double agent story, go watch Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. Season 1. I think you'll be happy with that. 1000 Rogue Leader commented that he didn't like the conclusion of the war, and it mostly kind of ties back to how I'm trying to keep in mind with RWBY's actual canon, with it being one big battle that solidifies it. But this was a huge-ass battle. This was massive scale. Like it escalated into a massive campaign that spanned entire miles of land. Tens of miles of land, maybe even hundreds of miles of land. You know, one battle can span gigantic distances, especially with more modern technology. But I mean, Atlas's ground forces were wiped out. Mistral's ground forces were effectively decimated. They were reduced to being pitiful in comparison to what remained of Vale's, and a little bit of what remained of Vacuo's, because Vacuo was heavily damaged in this battle, but there were environmental issues to deal with. There were political differences to deal with. There was morale issues to deal with. Basically, it was the breaking of the back. It was the straw that broke the camel's back. The other thing that you might notice that I've left out are a lot of the relics and a lot of the mentions of the maidens, which I won't get into those until I get to the actual volumes they're present in. I said that back in my commentary on my first video. But I will say I'm not completely ruling out that a relic could have played a role in this battle. What you saw in that video is mostly what people generally saw, the general zeitgeist, what people know about the situation, what people knew about the Great War and about this battle. So you can kind of extrapolate from that maybe there's some more going on under the scenes that we're not hearing. And this actually ties back a little bit into what kickstarted the war, that maybe there was some third-party intervention, some malicious party. Maybe it was Salem, maybe it was something else. Again, this is one of those instances where I'm kind of pulling back, kind of keeping the cards close to my chest until I get more information from the actual canon show. But I'm not ruling out that these incidents, these major incidents, could have been caused by more malicious forces that had more devious intents, dubious intents. So just keep that in mind. There's a lot that under the surface that might be at play. So I'm currently headcanoning it that the relic did play a role in the final battle. It just no one else knew about it. Like, no one knew the relic played a role. The king kept it under wraps. He just showed up and bam, kicked total ass. The next comment is from Carly Rael, which, by the way, hi Carly! For those of you who don't know, I'm actually in a production of hers, the audio drama adaptation of her fanfiction Forlorn. I'll try to hopefully remember to link that in the comments down below. Because she and Cowjump, her partner in this, do some excellent audio work on it. And it's one of the most well-written fanfiction I've ever read. So, I mean, that's some pretty high praise coming from me. I've read a lot of fanfiction in my days, and hers is one of the most engrossing. So I highly recommend checking it out. That said, her main question was over the faunus heat cycles, which I'm going to say they're a vestigial, I can't say that goddamned word, vestigial instinct. The heat cycle is no longer necessary in the modern world, especially considering that birth rates are going up in general with advances in technology and safer delivery methods. But it is still it's basically a remnant of what the faunus used to be. They used to be a little more primal, a little more animalistic. And it's become more of an inconvenience overall than any kind of benefit it could actually be. So, that's kind of a grating issue between faunus and humans, that humans don't really understand that faunus have these urges they have very little control over, and they do have medication that can suppress it, but it's not 100%, 100% effective. And yeah, I think I addressed this, that I'm playing more fast and loose with the nature of religion, so the entire history of the brothers and such, I'm keeping that in a more vague territory. But I'm glad you're at least raising concerns in that regard. Because she mentioned some stuff about the brothers. Stereotypical gamer asks about where does dust fall into this. It's a natural resource. I mean, yeah, Salem implies that it's more, humanity descended from it. Again, I'm playing fast and loose with the creationism type stuff. Dust is a weapon, a propellant, a fuel source, and it is easily mined. Think of it, if you really want to think of it like coal and oil in our modern day. Think of it like that kind of resource. It is a very valuable. It's like liquid gold, effectively, or I should say crystallized gold, and it sells very, very well in the market. A lot of the strains in the war were over a lot of the mining issues going on in Vale, or Vacuo, I should say. Vacuo's mines became a key battleground for a lot of the fights because people need dust in order to fuel their endeavors. So dust, it's important. It's there. It's just a background item until it becomes part of the foreground, which it will in more certain battles in the future volumes. Let's see, this is by Red Dead. Red Dead 405 made a good comment about the fondness, the jealousy towards the fondness not necessarily being the key attribute. And yeah, okay, maybe I was kind of overextending it, but I didn't want to necessarily go with the key, they're different than us mentality when it came to explaining why the fondness were so despised, or at least prejudiced against. So there is a lot of, oh, they're different, the uncanny valley, they're not us type mentality. That is a common one, but jealousy helps fuel it further because not only are they different than us, they are better than us in some ways. And humanity, being generalist, often don't recognize how effective they are on their own, and only see the fondness succeeding without seeing any of their failings. And thus that leads to some animosity. Or admiration in some cases. I mean, that's Vacuo for sure. Definitely a lot of the people there admire the fondness for their fortitude, and actually because of that they can recognize where the fondness have shortcomings. So that's sort of what I was going for, to elaborate on that point. So thanks for asking that question. Shine York Boy points out that wouldn't slavery attract the Grimm? And that's a good point. It would, were not for a couple of factors. One, the pervasive belief that Faunus were believed to not attract the Grimm because they were more animalistic. It's only a recent discovery that Grimm are actually attracted to negative emotion. Now, what may have started that rumor is that the Faunus, in their extremer conditions, had an easier time adapting and were more comfortable, thus meaning they had less negative emotions to spread around, and the Grimm were less attracted to them than the humans that were struggling more actively. But the pervasive belief that Faunus didn't attract Grimm led to them being enslaved and used for work that would normally attract Grimm due to the strain and danger of the conditions. But also contributing to this is the Grimm have a limited sense of that. They have a much more limited sense than the Grimm in the show. So it's a little safer to do this kind of work, but there's still some dangers. And at the very least, once slave owners used another group of slaves as bait, effectively torturing them in order to attract the Grimm to a safer location away from the active work being done. So there were methods and ideologies going behind this. And especially that particular torture method only came around after the discovery that Grimm were attracted to negative emotion and not, something else in general. Rostoloman is asking about where the boundaries fall for each kingdom, and while I could sit down and hash those out, they don't necessarily play a major role in things. When it comes to Volume 4, I will actually sit down and hash out a lot of the terrain of Mistral in particular, because I feel like RWBY and Co. running in circles is one of the dumbest things that has ever occurred in the show. Literally, their movements make no sense. So, I'm going to actually pen out what their path is and try to figure out why they're on it in general. Now, again, I'll get to that in Volume 4. I won't necessarily do it now. I think it's kind of foolhardy, especially since we don't know a lot of the terrain that's going into these kingdoms. And it's not necessarily super important at the moment. But I'm glad you're thinking of that. That is a very nice thing to think about. I would if I could, my friend. I would if I could. Now, CX3, question about how this will play into exposition, and I'll go back to what I said earlier at the very beginning of this, is how does all this come together? How does all this flow into one cohesive story? The elements that need to make themselves known will have been written and made, and when they're made necessary in the story, will become relevant. Anything that's superfluous can be added to, and additional content, such as Walter Remnant, if you feel so like adding that. They can be added to extraneous content. Like I said, a tabletop RPG of RWBY would be really cool. Now, you don't need all this exposition to be dumped in one place. It can just be threaded through environmental details and the like. So that's my answer to you. It's all about having it there when you need it, not necessarily needing to get it out all at once or getting it out at all. It can be just all told environmentally, if necessary. Even then, some of this stuff will maybe never get used. That's sort of the curse of writing. You have ideas that just never make it. They're all left on the cutting room floor. Getting into the very last comments. Luca Blight 69 had the idea to distinguish the academies, and I'll probably get into that more when the academies show up in the actual show. You have some solid suggestions. I might steal from that in the future, so keep an eye out if I use one of your ideas, and if I forget to credit you, please shout at me. I will certainly bow to your some of your ideas here. They're pretty good. Now, Locutus. Man, if I were to respond to every single comment you left, it would take up probably an entire video all its own, maybe even two. You leave a lot of detail, and I give you that's a lot. And I understand a lot of your concerns. You have some great criticisms. I'm taking them to heart. It hurts because there's a lot that I can't change. But you're asking about what is the purpose of fixing RWBY, and there's something else I want to address as well in order to kind of alleviate your fears. But what is the purpose of fixing RWBY? It is to take the ideas and the presented storyline and try to make it make sense. That's effectively it. It's a very loose term. It's a very loose definition of fixing. But I just want this show to actually make sense and be good in some way. I want to take those elements and try and extrapolate on them in a way that fulfills them. I want to fulfill the potential of all these ideas. And to do that, one of the angles I'm taking is that each volume itself is going to have a self-contained story. That doesn't mean that elements from previous volumes aren't going to come back to play a role in later volumes. But what that means is that each volume is going to have a very clear beginning, middle, and end. A very clear plot progression that leads characters through arcs, that lead characters into conclusions. That's what I want to do, at least going forward with the actual individual volumes. Right now, RWBY itself is heavily dependent upon building upon previous volumes, especially, and that's really faulty, especially when previous volumes are already weak to begin with. Volume 1's biggest issue is that it was building towards something. You know, all the volumes were just build-up. They weren't actually accomplishing anything on their own, which is why I want Volume 1 to have its own storyline. That's going to involve Roman Torchwick, theft, and all this other good stuff. Volume 2 is going to have its own separate storyline. Volume 3 is going to have its own separate storyline. They are going to borrow elements and build upon elements featured in Volumes 1 and 2, and eventually 4 will borrow from 3. But the gist of it is, these volumes will be able to stand on their own. And even if you don't know everything about, if you haven't watched Volume 1, you should generally be able to watch Volume 2, or watch Volume 3, or watch Volume 4. You don't need any of that backstory. I hope that explains it. I hope that makes sense to you. And if not, maybe hold out a little hope for actually seeing how I handle Volume 1 and how I make it self-contained, to see what I mean. But I'm trying my best here to keep RWBY intact, but also improve upon it. Which Fatman said, one of the big things that makes RWBY RWBY is the fact that it's a hot, steaming mess. So, you can see, right now, I'm playing with fire doing this. But your concerns are noted. Whether or not this series sinks or swims, we'll see when I get to it. Now, that's it for this video, folks. I've gone through just about every single comment, and damn, these comments are getting hard to respond to. I can't believe I took notes on this, and thanks for that, guys. No, I love you guys. I love your commenting. Just know that in the future, I might reach the point where I might be able to comment, respond to every single comment like I did. In fact, I didn't respond to every single comment, just the ones that I think had key concerns. And even then, I think I might have skipped one or two because I didn't think it was super vital. I feel bad about that, but I can't feasibly keep this going forever. I can't feasibly comment ad nauseum. My voice is getting hoarse as hell right now, and it's been, this is the second time I've recorded this, actually. As for my next video, it's not going to be a Fixing RWBY video. It's actually going to be my first ever patron commission, effectively, as a reward for finally reaching $50 on Patreon. If you want to contribute that, please check out the Patreon video, Patreon link down below. I could always use your patronage. Remember that everything goes towards producing this show. That said, what the actual video is going to be about, let's just say, fate has some big plans in store for me. Catch you on the flip side. Hey there! If you liked the video, please hit that like button down below, or even leave a message in the comments. If you're interested in more content like this, check out the rest of the channel, as well as our Facebook page and my Twitter handle. If you'd like updates on our newest content, hit that subscribe button so our news of our most recent work reaches you as fast as possible. And if you're feeling especially generous today, please check out our Patreon page. It's thanks to you, our faithful fans and followers, that we can make the content that we love. Please keep up that support, and as always, we'll catch you on the flip side.